Welcome to Galactic Nova Stories, where cosmic emotions come to life. Your journey begins now. The crimson sand of Keth stretched endlessly beyond the wreckage of Marcus's diplomatic vessel, its twisted metal hull smoking against the alien sky. 3 purple suns hung overhead like watching eyes, casting strange shadows that danced with the heat waves rising from the crash site. Marcus pressed his palm against a gash on his forehead, watching dark red blood seep between his fingers. His emergency beacon had been broadcasting for 2 days now, but no rescue ship had appeared on the horizon. Water was running dangerously low. His survival kit contained enough rations for perhaps another day, maybe 2, if he rationed carefully. The atmospheric readings showed the air was breathable, but everything else about this world remained a mystery. The Galactic Council had classified Keth as inhabited, but non-contact, meaning its native species had never engaged in interstellar diplomacy. Now Marcus found himself the unwitting first ambassador, assuming he lived long enough to make contact. Melodic humming drifted across the wasteland, so soft he almost dismissed it as wind, through the crashed ship's twisted framework. But the sound carried a distinct pattern, almost like a lullaby. Marcus grabbed his sidearm and climbed carefully over a fallen beam, following the haunting melody toward a cluster of crystalline formations that jutted from the sand like frozen lightning. She appeared between the crystals like a vision from another realm, tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to absorb and reflect the purple sunlight in shifting patterns. Her hair moved as if underwater, defying the desert wind, and her eyes held depths that reminded Marcus of Earth's deepest oceans. She wore flowing garments that seemed woven from moonbeams, and when she saw him, her humming stopped abruptly. For several heartbeats, they simply stared at each other across the alien landscape. Marcus slowly holstered his weapon, raising both hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. The being took a step closer, her head tilted with obvious curiosity. When she spoke, her voice carried the same musical quality as her humming, though the words were incomprehensible. Marcus touched his chest and said slowly, "Marcus." He repeated the gesture several times until understanding flickered in her eyes. She placed a delicate hand against her own chest and replied with a sound like wind chimes, something that might have been Lyra in human approximation. Communication proved challenging, but Lyra seemed to understand his predicament. She gestured toward his empty water container, then to herself, making drinking motions. Marcus nodded eagerly, expecting her to lead him to some hidden spring or water cache. Instead, she approached him directly, her expression growing solemn and ceremonial. Lyra began unfastening her garment at the shoulder, and Marcus stepped back in confusion and embarrassment. But she wasn't disrobing. She was revealing a small natural opening in her torso, similar to what Marcus might expect from a mammalian species, though far more elegant and luminescent. A pearl-white liquid began to flow from the opening into her cupped palm. The realization struck him like a thunderbolt. She was offering to nourish him directly from her body, the way a mother might feed her young. Among humans, such an act would be intimate beyond measure, but Lyra's demeanor suggested this was something else entirely, perhaps a sacred gesture of hospitality or survival aid. Marcus hesitated, overwhelmed by the implications. Every diplomatic protocol he'd ever learned screamed warnings about accepting unknown substances from alien species, but his water was nearly gone, and something in Lyra's eyes conveyed both urgency and deep meaning. This wasn't just about survival. It was about trust, connection, and perhaps the foundation of first contact between their species. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. Galactic Nova Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. Marcus cupped his hands beneath hers, accepting the luminous liquid. It felt warm against his palms, almost alive with subtle energy. Lyra watched intently as he brought his hands to his lips. The liquid tasted like starlight and distant music, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. As it flowed down his throat, warmth spread through his chest, and something fundamental shifted in the space between his thoughts. The desert around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting for whatever would come next. The change began as a whisper in Marcus's mind, so subtle he almost missed it, beneath the relief of finally having moisture on his parched throat. But as the last drops of Lyra's luminous milk disappeared, that whisper became a rushing tide of sensation that threatened to sweep away his sense of self entirely. Emotions that weren't his own crashed through his consciousness like waves against a seawall. Wonder tinged with ancient sadness, curiosity laced with protective instinct, a deep, abiding loneliness that seemed to echo across centuries. Marcus staggered backward, his hands flying to his temples as foreign feelings flooded every corner of his awareness. "What's happening to me?" he gasped, but even as the words left his lips, he somehow knew the answer wasn't coming from his own knowledge. Lyra's eyes had gone wide with shock, her elegant features twisted in what could only be described as delighted terror. She was experiencing something equally overwhelming. Marcus could feel it as clearly as his own racing heartbeat. Through the chaotic storm of shared sensation, Marcus caught glimpses of memories that belonged to someone else entirely. A crystalline city that grew from living rock, its spires reaching toward purple skies. Ceremonies where beings like Lyra gathered in perfect harmony, their voices creating music that could reshape matter itself. The devastating loneliness of being the last of her kind in this remote outpost, tasked with watching the empty desert for signs of change. But Lyra wasn't just observing his memories, she was living them. Marcus felt her consciousness recoil from the violent chaos of human history, then surge forward with fascination at humanity's relentless drive to explore and connect. She experienced his childhood wonder at seeing Earth's moon for the first time, his determination to become a diplomat despite his humble origins, his deep love for a species that constantly surprised him with its capacity for both cruelty and transcendent beauty. The psychic connection wasn't just sharing surface thoughts, it was creating a complete emotional fusion that neither species had ever documented. Marcus found himself experiencing colors he'd never seen before, emotions for which humans had no names, and a perspective on existence that stretched his understanding of consciousness itself. "This shouldn't be possible," Marcus whispered, though he wasn't sure if he spoke aloud or directly into Lyra's mind. The boundaries between self and other had become fluid, uncertain. He could feel her agreement, tinged with awe and growing excitement. Lyra approached him slowly, her movements graceful despite the obvious chaos in her own mind. When she reached out to touch his face, Marcus felt the contact echo through multiple levels of awareness. Her physical touch was gentle and warm, but psychically it was like watching two stars collide and birth something entirely new. Images flashed between them with increasing speed and clarity. Marcus saw how her people had evolved their milk-sharing as the ultimate act of trust and communion, but always between members of the same species. The nutritional exchange was supposed to create temporary empathy, not this complete psychological merger. In all their recorded history, nothing like this had ever occurred. From Marcus's perspective, Lyra witnessed humanity's unique position in the galaxy, a species that had developed emotional complexity and psychological resilience that allowed them to form deep connections without losing individual identity. Where other species might fragment under such intense psychic pressure, humans adapted and integrated new experiences into their expanding sense of self. The revelation staggered both of them. Humans weren't just another spacefaring species bumbling through the galaxy. They were psychically compatible with forms of consciousness that other races found overwhelming or impossible to navigate. Marcus felt Lyra's people's ancient longing for true connection, their cycles of isolation broken only by brief, limited communion through their milk-sharing rituals. But with a human, the connection was different, stronger, more complete, and terrifyingly permanent. Marcus tried to step away from Lyra, hoping distance might diminish the intensity of their bond, but the psychic link followed him like his own shadow. If anything, attempting separation made the connection more acute, as if their consciousness were two parts of a newly formed whole that couldn't exist independently. "We need to understand what's happened to us," Marcus said, his voice hoarse with effort. Speaking felt strange when they could communicate directly mind to mind, but somehow the familiar act of verbal communication helped anchor his human identity in the swirling chaos of shared experience. Through their link, he felt Lyra's agreement, along with her growing realization that this development would change everything. Not just for them personally, but for both their species and perhaps the galaxy itself. Days blended into nights as Marcus and Lyra learned to navigate their unprecedented connection. The crashed ship became their temporary sanctuary while they explored the boundaries of what had happened to them. Marcus discovered he could access not just Lyra's current emotions, but layers of experience that went back generations, for her people carried ancestral memories in their very cells, passed down through the sacred milk that bound their communities together. Through Lyra's inherited knowledge, Marcus learned that the Kethians were far older than humanity had guessed. Their civilization spanned millions of years, but it was built on careful, measured connections that prevented the chaos of unlimited psychic fusion. They had developed elaborate protocols for their communion rituals, strict limitations that kept individual identity intact while allowing for brief, beautiful moments of shared consciousness. But Marcus was shattering every rule simply by existing within their bond. "Your species feels everything so intensely," Lyra whispered during one of their verbal conversations, her voice filled with wonder and exhaustion. Even speaking had become a form of intimacy between them, since they could feel each word's emotional resonance through their link. "When you remember your homeworld, I can taste the salt in your oceans, feel the warmth of your sun on skin I've never had. How do you contain so much sensation without losing yourselves?" Marcus considered her question, while simultaneously experiencing her amazement at human emotional range. Through her perspective, he saw humanity's feelings as vast, chaotic symphonies, where other species might experience simple melodies. Love for humans wasn't just affection, it was passion and protectiveness and sacrifice and joy and terror, all woven together into something that could drive them to impossible achievements or devastating destruction. "We don't contain it," Marcus realized, the understanding flowing between them as he spoke. "We let it change us. Every experience makes us into something new, but we stay ourselves by choosing how to integrate what we feel. Other species try to maintain static identity, but humans are comfortable with constant transformation." The concept fascinated and frightened Lyra in equal measure. Her people's psychological evolution had prioritized stability and harmony over growth and change. They were masters of their inner landscape, but they had sacrificed the wild creativity that came from embracing chaos. Through Marcus, she experienced what it meant to be a species that thrived on emotional turbulence, that found strength in vulnerability and wisdom in uncertainty. Their connection revealed something extraordinary about human consciousness that even humans themselves didn't fully understand. Marcus's mind wasn't being overwhelmed by the psychic fusion because human brains had evolved to handle multiple, contradictory emotional states simultaneously. They could hold love and anger, hope and despair, certainty and doubt in perfect tension without fragmenting. This psychological flexibility made humans uniquely suited for deep psychic bonds. Where another species might lose themselves in Lyra's vast emotional landscape, Marcus could navigate it while maintaining his core identity. He became larger, more complex, enriched by the connection rather than consumed by it. But the revelation worked both ways. As Lyra experienced human emotional resilience, she began to change as well. The rigid mental structures that had kept her people stable for eons started to flex and adapt. She found herself capable of holding contradictory feelings without panic, of embracing uncertainty as a source of growth rather than a threat to be eliminated. Their bond was creating something unprecedented, a fusion that enhanced both participants rather than diminishing them. Marcus remained recognizably human, but with access to Lyra's deep wisdom and ancestral knowledge. Lyra stayed true to her essential nature while gaining humanity's emotional courage and adaptability. The implications staggered them both. If humans could form such connections with other psychic species without losing themselves, it suggested humanity might serve as bridges between civilizations that had remained isolated for millennia. They could be the translators of consciousness itself, the species capable of fostering understanding between minds too different to communicate through normal channels. But first, they had to survive the intensity of their own connection. Each day brought new challenges as their bond deepened. Marcus found himself dreaming Lyra's ancestral memories, while she experienced human concepts like ambition and romantic love for the first time. They were becoming something new together, and neither could predict what they might become. Through it all, Marcus marveled at the strange courage that had brought them to this point. Not just his decision to drink from Lyra's offering, but humanity's willingness to leap into the unknown, to risk transformation in pursuit of connection. It was perhaps the most human thing of all, to see something impossible and reach for it anyway. The crystalline formations around their makeshift camp began to resonate with harmonic frequencies that Marcus felt in his bones. Through his connection with Lyra, he understood that her people were coming, drawn by psychic emanations from their unprecedented bond that could be felt across the planet's psychic network. "They're afraid," Lyra whispered, her consciousness tight with anxiety that Marcus experienced as his own. "Nothing like this has ever happened. Some think you might be a parasite consuming my identity. Others believe I've been contaminated by alien thought patterns." Marcus felt the approaching Keithians through Lyra's enhanced senses, dozens of them moving across the crystalline desert in perfect formation, their minds linked in the careful, limited communion their species had, practiced for millennia. But as they drew closer to Marcus and Lyra's position, their ordered thoughts began to scatter and fragment. The raw intensity of the human-Kethian bond was like a psychic storm that disrupted their delicate mental harmonies. When the first of Lyra's people crested the dunes, Marcus was struck by their ethereal beauty and obvious terror. They moved like dancers, each step coordinated with the others through subtle psychic cues, but their formation wavered as they encountered the chaotic energy field generated by his and Lyra's connection. The leader, an ancient Keithian, whose skin had taken on the deep purple hue of extreme age, stopped just outside what Marcus sensed was their comfort zone. Through Lyra's translation, Marcus heard the elder's words, "Child of the Watching Stone, what has been done to you? Your mind song is chaos, your thoughts touched by alien madness." "I am not mad, Keeper Dane," Lyra replied, her voice carrying new harmonics that Marcus realized came from their connection. "I am changed, enlarged, made greater by bond sharing with this human." The gathered Kethians recoiled as if physically struck. Marcus felt their collective horror through Lyra's empathic abilities. To them, change was synonymous with corruption, growth with contamination. Their entire civilization was built on maintaining perfect stasis, preserving the wisdom of ages through unchanging tradition. But Marcus also sensed something else beneath their fear, a deep, aching curiosity that they'd suppressed for countless generations. Through his bond with Lyra, he could feel their buried longing for something beyond their carefully controlled existence, their secret dreams of growth and transformation that they'd denied for so long they'd forgotten they ever existed. "Watch," Marcus said softly, his words somehow reaching all of them through the psychic field surrounding him and Lyra. "Let me show you what we've become." Without breaking his connection to Lyra, Marcus began to share specific memories through their bond, but not chaotic human experiences that might overwhelm the watching Keithians. Instead, he chose moments of profound human resilience. A child, learning to walk after losing her legs, her determination undaunted by failure, a scientist spending decades searching for a cure that would save future generations, a parent sacrificing everything to give their children opportunities they'd never had themselves. The Keithians watched in stunned silence as Marcus demonstrated humanity's greatest gift, the ability to transform suffering into strength, to find hope in darkness, to grow rather than break under pressure. Through Lyra's enhanced empathic abilities, they experienced these memories not as foreign concepts, but as living possibilities. "I see," Lyra said, her voice ringing with new confidence. "The human mind doesn't shatter under change. It shapes change into something beautiful. Marcus hasn't consumed my identity. He's helped me discover parts of myself I never knew existed. Keeper. Dane stepped closer, his ancient eyes fixed on Marcus with a mixture of fear and wonder. But what of the chaos? Your bond disrupts our harmony, makes ordered thought impossible. Marcus stood slowly, feeling Lyra's consciousness steady him as dozens of alien minds focused on his every movement. Your harmony is beautiful, he said, but it's incomplete. You've achieved perfect order by suppressing half of existence, the messy, dangerous, transformative half that leads to growth. He gestured to the crystalline formations around them, their perfect geometric shapes gleaming in the purple sunlight. Even your crystals grow through controlled chaos, adding new layers that make them larger and more complex. Growth requires some degree of disorder, some willingness to become something new. Through his bond with Lyra, Marcus projected a vision of what their species might achieve together. Keithian wisdom and stability combined with human adaptability and emotional courage. Civilizations that had remained isolated for eons could be connected through human psychic bridges. Ancient knowledge could be combined with innovative thinking. The galaxy's disparate species could finally communicate on the deepest levels of consciousness. Several of the younger Keithians stepped forward, their fear giving way to fascination. Marcus felt their tentative openness through the psychic field, their willingness to consider possibilities their elders had deemed impossible. But Keeper Dane raised a hand, his expression hardening. Enough. This contamination ends now. The alien will be cleansed from your mind, child, even if the process destroys you both. The confrontation Marcus had hoped to avoid was about to begin. The cleansing ritual began at dawn, with dozens of Keithians forming concentric circles around Marcus and Lyra. Their combined psychic presence felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane, eerily calm at the center, while devastating forces swirled just beyond reach. Marcus could feel their unified intention pressing against his consciousness like a physical weight, seeking to sever the bond that had become as essential to his existence as breathing. "They don't understand," Lyra whispered, her mental voice tight with pain as the cleansing energies began their work. "They think love is possession, that connection means the death of self. Show them what we really are." Marcus felt the Keithian elders' psychic techniques beginning to dissect their bond with surgical precision. But instead of resisting, he did something that caught them completely off guard. He opened himself even further, allowing their probing minds to experience the full depth of his connection with Lyra without the protective barriers that most conscious beings maintained instinctively. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The eldest Keithians, accustomed to carefully controlled mental communion, suddenly found themselves drowning in the raw intensity of human emotional experience. But where they expected to find chaos and madness, they discovered something far more disturbing to their worldview. Perfect harmony achieved through embracing contradiction. Through Marcus's consciousness, they experienced the human concept of identity as something fluid and expanding, rather than fixed and protected. They felt how he could love Lyra completely, while remaining absolutely himself. How sharing her memories and emotions had made him more Marcus rather than less. The human mind, they realized with growing amazement, didn't fragment under pressure. It integrated new experiences into an ever-growing sense of self. Keeper Dane staggered backward, his ancient mind reeling from contact with Marcus's unguarded consciousness. "Impossible," he breathed, his voice carrying harmonics of awe and terror. "Your thoughts should be scattered, your identity dissolved. How do you maintain coherence while embracing such chaos?" Marcus felt Lyra's strength flowing through their bond, her understanding helping him articulate concepts that no human had ever needed to explain before. "Because we're not afraid of becoming something new," he said, his words resonating through the psychic field that surrounded them. "Every human is already multiple beings, child and adult, dreamer and realist, individual and part of something larger. We've been preparing for connections like this our entire evolutionary history." Through their link, Lyra began sharing her own transformation, how bonding with Marcus hadn't diminished her essential Keithian nature, but had revealed hidden depths she'd never imagined possible. She showed them memories of experiencing human concepts like hope, in the face of impossible odds, the joy of discovery, the bittersweet beauty of mortality that gave every moment precious meaning. The younger Keithians in the outer circles began to break from their rigid formation, drawn forward by the revelation that growth and change didn't have to mean death and chaos. Through Marcus and Lyra's bond, they glimpsed possibilities their species had abandoned eons ago, the chance to become more than they were while remaining true to their essential selves. But it was when Marcus shared humanity's deepest secret that the assembled Keithians finally understood what made his species unique in the galaxy. He opened his memories to show them Earth's history, not the wars and conflicts that other species focused on, but humanity's unprecedented capacity for sacrifice and redemption. He showed them parents dying for children they'd never meet, scientists dedicating their lives to problems they'd never solve, ordinary people choosing compassion over safety again and again. This is why we can handle psychic bonds that destroy other species, Marcus explained, his consciousness expanding to embrace every Keithian present. We've been practicing emotional fusion our entire history. Every time a human chooses to care about someone else's pain, every act of empathy and sacrifice, we're sharing consciousness. We've been building the psychological muscles needed for true psychic communion for thousands of years. The revelation hit the assembled Keithians like a shockwave. They had achieved psychic abilities through technological and biological evolution, but humans had developed the emotional capacity for deep connection through choice and practice. Every human act of love was preparation for bonds like the one Marcus and Lyra shared. Keeper Dane's resistance finally crumbled as he experienced the memory of Marcus's decision to drink Lyra's offering, not driven by desperate need alone, but by a fundamentally human willingness to trust, to risk everything for the possibility of connection. It was the same impulse that had driven humans to explore space, to reach across the void between stars in search of others who might understand their isolation. "We have been fools," the ancient Keithian whispered, his voice carrying new harmonics of wonder and regret. "We thought consciousness was a treasure to be hoarded, protected, kept pure. But you show us it's a gift meant to be shared, something that grows stronger when it's given away." The cleansing ritual dissolved as the Keithians' unified resistance transformed into curious amazement. For the first time in their recorded history, they were witnessing growth that didn't threaten destruction, change that brought enhancement rather than loss. Marcus felt Lyra's joy flowing through their bond as her people began to understand what they had truly discovered. Not a contamination to be cleansed, but an evolutionary leap that could transform both species. The revelation of Marcus and Lyra's successful bond sent ripples through the Keithian political structure that had remained unchanged for millennia. Within days of the failed cleansing ritual, the planet's governing council had split into two factions: those who saw the human-Keithian connection as a dangerous precedent that threatened their civilization's stability, and those who viewed it as the key to breaking free from eons of stagnation. Marcus found himself at the center of debates, conducted through psychic communion that lasted for days without pause. Through Lyra's connection to her people's collective consciousness, he could feel the tension building across their entire world as fundamental beliefs came under scrutiny for the first time in recorded history. "The Wardens of Purity have convinced half the council that our bond is a psychic virus," Lyra explained during one of their brief moments of private communion. "They believe that if other Keithians attempt similar connections with humans, our entire species will lose its identity and descend into chaos." But Marcus also sensed the growing excitement among younger Keithians who had witnessed their bond firsthand. Through the planet's psychic network, stories of the human who could share consciousness without consuming it spread like wildfire. Many began to question why their species had limited itself to such careful, restricted forms of communion when possibilities like Marcus and Lyra's connection existed. The crisis deepened when a group of radical Keithians attempted to recreate the bonding process with genetic samples from Marcus's crashed ship. Without understanding the emotional prerequisites that made such connections possible, their experiment resulted in psychic fragmentation that left 3 volunteers in catatonic states. The Wardens of Purity seized on this failure as proof that Human-Kethian bonding was inherently destructive. They're trying to replicate the end result without understanding the journey, Marcus realized, as he felt the traumatized volunteers' shattered consciousness through the planet's psychic network. The bond isn't just about consuming alien substances, it's about the willingness to trust, to risk everything for connection. You can't force that kind of courage. Keeper Dane, now one of Marcus's most passionate supporters, arranged for him to address the full council through their most sacred form of communion, a planet-wide psychic link that would allow every Kethian to experience his thoughts and emotions directly. It was an unprecedented honor for an alien, but also a dangerous gamble. If Marcus failed to convince them, the resulting backlash might lead to his execution and Lyra's exile. Standing in the crystalline heart of their capital city, surrounded by the assembled wisdom of an ancient civilization, Marcus felt the weight of two species' futures pressing down on him. Through his bond with Lyra, he could sense millions of Kethian minds focusing on his consciousness, waiting to judge whether humanity represented salvation or damnation. "I won't lie to you about what connection with humans means," Marcus began, his thoughts rippling outward through the planetary network. "We are chaos, we are change, we are everything your species has spent eons learning to avoid. But we're also something you've forgotten how to be. We're alive." He opened his memories to show them Earth in all its contradictory glory. Cities that rose and fell, civilizations that built wonders and destroyed them, humans who loved and hated with equal passion. Through his consciousness, the Kethians experienced humanity's refusal to choose between order and chaos, instead finding ways to embrace both simultaneously. But more importantly, Marcus showed them what Lyra had become through their connection. Not a corrupted shadow of her former self, but a Kethian who had discovered depths of experience her species had never imagined possible. She was still recognizably herself, but enlarged, enriched, transformed into something greater than the sum of her original parts. "This is what growth looks like," Marcus projected through the planetary link. "Not the destruction of what you were, but the discovery of what you could become. Lyra hasn't lost her Kethian nature. She's found ways to express it that your rigid traditions never allowed." Through their bond, Lyra began to sing, not with her voice but with her enhanced consciousness, creating harmonies that resonated through the planetary network in ways that pure Kethian minds could never achieve. Her song carried the emotional complexity she'd learned from Marcus, while maintaining the ethereal beauty that was uniquely her own. It was a fusion of human passion and Kethian grace that transcended what either species could create alone. The effect on the assembled council was profound. For the first time in their collective memory, they were experiencing music that touched not just their aesthetic sense, but their deepest emotions. Lyra's hybrid consciousness had found ways to express concepts that pure Kethian minds couldn't even perceive, showing them possibilities they'd never dreamed existed. As her song faded, Marcus felt the shift in the planetary consciousness. Fear was giving way to wonder, resistance to curiosity. The Kethians were beginning to understand that human-Kethian bonding wasn't about humans conquering their minds. It was about both species discovering what they could become together. The vote, when it came, would determine not just Marcus and Lyra's fate, but the future relationship between their civilizations. The Council's decision came not through words, but through a shift in the planetary consciousness that Marcus felt like dawn breaking after an endless night. Through his bond with Lyra, he experienced the collective awakening of an entire species as they chose growth over stagnation, connection over isolation, transformation over the safety of unchanging tradition. By unanimous consensus of the expanded consciousness, Keeper Dane announced, his ancient voice carrying harmonics of joy and terror, we formally recognize the Marcus-Lyra bond as a new form of evolutionary development. Furthermore, we extend an invitation to humanity to establish formal diplomatic and consciousness-sharing protocols with our people. The implications staggered Marcus. Not only had they survived the political crisis, but they'd opened a door that could transform the entire galactic community. Through their bond, he felt Lyra's amazement at her people's decision, and her growing understanding of what they'd accomplished together. Within months, the first human embassy was established on Keth, staffed by carefully selected diplomats who'd undergone extensive psychological preparation for deep psychic bonding. Not every human could form the kind of connection Marcus and Lyra shared. It required a specific combination of emotional resilience, empathic sensitivity, and the courage to risk complete psychological transformation. But those who could create bonds that astonished both species. Human Kethian pairs began pushing the boundaries of consciousness itself, exploring forms of shared experience that neither species could achieve alone. They became living bridges between radically different forms of awareness, translators of concepts that had no words in any language. The success on Keth attracted attention from across the galaxy. Species that had remained isolated for eons began reaching out, curious about humanity's apparent gift for psychic communion. The ethereal collective, beings of pure energy who had, considered biological life too primitive for contact, requested human ambassadors capable of bridging the gap between matter and consciousness. The hive minds of Altair, whose group consciousness had made them incomprehensible to individual-based species, found that human empathic abilities could navigate their collective awareness without being subsumed. Marcus and Lyra became the template for a new kind of diplomacy, not just political negotiation, but consciousness sharing that created genuine understanding between species. Their bond had proven that connection didn't require the loss of individual identity, that love could exist without possession, that growth could happen without destruction, but perhaps most importantly, they'd revealed humanity's true place in the galactic community, not as conquerors or explorers, though humans were both, but as connectors, the species uniquely adapted to form deep bonds with radically different forms of consciousness while maintaining their essential humanity. Standing together in the Ed crystalline garden where they'd first met, watching purple sunlight dance through formations that sang with the harmonies of two worlds, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Our crashed ship, a desperate need for water, and a moment of trust between strangers had become the foundation for a new kind of civilization. "Do you ever regret it?" Lyra asked, her consciousness intertwining with his in the effortless intimacy they'd learned to share. "Drinking from me that first day, accepting a connection that changed everything about who you were." Marcus considered the question while experiencing Lyra's own complex feelings about their transformation. Through their bond, he could feel the echoes of every choice that had brought them here, his decision to trust despite the risks, her courage in offering sustenance to an alien stranger, their joint commitment to exploring what they'd become rather than fighting it. "I didn't just gain a connection with you," Marcus replied, his thoughts carrying the full emotional weight of their shared experiences. "I discovered what humans are truly capable of. We're not just another species stumbling through space, we're the universe's way of connecting with itself, of bridging the gaps between consciousness that seemed impossible to cross." Their bond pulsed with shared understanding and joy. They'd become proof that love could be a form of evolution, that connection could enhance rather than diminish, that the greatest treasures in existence were meant to be shared rather than hoarded. As the first stars appeared in Keith's purple sky, Marcus felt the vast network of human-alien bonds spreading across the galaxy, each connection a testament to humanity's greatest gift. They were the species that had learned to love without limits, to connect without consuming, to grow through caring about others more than themselves. In choosing trust over fear, connection over isolation, Marcus and Lyra had shown the galaxy what humans had always known in their hearts, that consciousness was not a fortress to be defended, but a bridge waiting to be built. And in building those bridges, humanity had finally found its purpose among the stars. The universe, it turned out, had been waiting for them all along.